I was standing on the fender. They had a running board on the old Ford, you remember. I was standing on that fender, steady in the back seat, she and I. And she said, "You mean you won't smoke a cigarette?" Said, "And we girls has got more nerve than you have." I said, "No, ma'am, don't believe I want to do it." She said, "Well, you big sissy." Oh, my. I wanted to be Big Bad Bill, so I sure didn't want nothing sissy. See, I wanted to be a prize fighter. That was my idea of life. So I said, "Sissy, sissy." I couldn't stand that. So I said, "Give it to me." I handed out, so I'll show her where I'm sissy or not. Got that cigarette out and started to strike the match. Now, I know I'm not responsible for what you think. I'm just responsible for telling the truth. When I started to strike that cigarette, just as much determined to smoke it as I am to pick up this Bible, see, I heard something going. I tried again. I couldn't get it to my mouth. I got to crying, I throwed the thing down, and they got to laughing at me, and I walked home. Went up to the fields, sat down out there crying, and it was a terrible life. I remember one day Dad was going down the river, the boys, my brother and I, we had to take a boat and go up and down the river hunting bottles to put the whiskey in. We got a nickel a dozen for them to pick them up along the river. And Dad was with me, and he had one of these little flat, I believe, about a half-pint bottles. And there's a tree had blown down, and Dad and this man was with him, Mr. Darnbush. He had a nice boat, and I wanted to find favor with him because I wanted to use that boat. It had a good rudder. Mine didn't have no rudder at all. We had just old boards to paddle with. And if he'd let me use that boat. So he done welding, and he made the stills for Dad. So they threw their leg up across that tree, and Dad reached in his back pocket and pulled out a little flat bottle of whiskey, handed it to him, and he took a drink, handed it back to Dad, and he taken a drink. He set it down on a little sucker on the side of the tree that went out. And Mr. Darnbush picked it up and said, "Here you are, Billy." I said, "Thank you, I don't drink." He said, "A Branham? And don't drink?" Everyone died with their boots on nearly. And he said, "A Branham and don't drink?" I said, "No, sir." "No," Dad said, "I raised one sissy." My daddy calling me a sissy. I said, "Hand me that bottle." I pulled that stopper out of the top of it, determined to drink it, and when I started to turn it up, I handed the bottle back and took off down through the field as hard as I could, crying. Something wouldn't let me do it. See, I could not say, well, I was any good. I was determined to do it. But it's God, grace, amazing grace, that kept me from doing those things. I wanted to do them myself, but He just wouldn't let me do it. Later on, I found a girl when I was about 22 years old. She was a darling. She was a girl that went to church, German Lutheran. Her name was Brombach, B-R-U-M-B-A-C-H, come from the name of Brombaugh. And she was a nice girl. She didn't smoke or drink or she didn't dance or anything. A nice girl. I went with her for a little while, and then about 22, I'd made enough money I bought me an old Ford. And we'd go out on dates together, and so that time there was no Lutheran church close. They'd moved from Howard Park up there, and so there was a minister, the one that ordained me in the Missionary Baptist Church, Dr. Roy Davis, Sister Upshaw, the very one that sent Brother Upshaw over to me or talked to him about me, Dr. Roy Davis. And so he was preaching and had the First Baptist Church, or I don't believe it was the First Baptist Church either. It was called the Missionary Baptist Church at Jeffersonville. And he was preaching at the place at that time, and we would go to church at night. And we'd come back, and I never did join church, but I just liked to go with her because the main thought was going with her. I just might as well be honest. So then, going with her. And one day, she is out of a nice family. And I began to think, you know, I oughtn't take that girl's time. It isn't right. Because she's a nice girl. And I'm poor, and my daddy had broke down. It was called the Missionary Baptist Church in Jeffersonville. There was no way for her. And he was preaching at the place at that time, and we would go to church at night. Used to a nice home, and we'd come back, and I never did join church, but I just liked to go with her because I walked around the side. I thought it was the prettiest thing I ever seen in my life. How would they put something like that on the floor? It was the first rug I'd ever seen. It was this one of these. I believe it's called matting rugs. You know, I may have had that wrong. I wouldn't take that girl's time. Laced together. It isn't right. Floor, pretty because she's a nice girl, and I'm poor. It was a pretty thing. And my daddy had broke down in health, and there was no way for me to
ask her to
make
marry
a living for a girl like that who had been used to a nice home and rugs on the floor. I remember the first rug I ever seen. I didn't know what it was. I walked around the side. I thought it was the prettiest thing I ever seen in my life. How would they put something like that on the floor? It was the first rug I'd ever seen. It was this one of these. I believe it's called matting rugs. I may have had that wrong. Some kind of like wicker or something is laced together and laying on the floor, pretty green and red, pretty rough time. Of it, you know, it was a pretty thing. And
the only thing for me
I
to
remember
tell her that
I just won't be back because I thought too much of her to wreck her life and to let her fool along with me. And then I thought if somebody could get a hold of her and marry her, make a lovely home, and maybe if I couldn't have her, I could know that she was happy. And so I thought, but I just can't give her up. And I was in an awful shape. And day after day I'd think about it. So I was too bashful to ask her to marry me. Every night I'd make up my mind, I'm going to ask her. And when what is that, butterflies or something you get in your... all you brethren out there probably had the same experience along that. And a real funny feeling. My face would get hot. I didn't know. I couldn't ask her. So I guess you wonder how I ever got married. You know what? I wrote her a letter and asked her. And so, now it wasn't dear miss. It was a little more, on the love side than that. It was just not an agreement. It was, I wrote it up best I could. And I was a little afraid of her mother. Her mother she was kind of rough. And, but her father was a gentle old Dutchman, just a fine old fella. He was an organizer of the Brotherhood of the Trainmen on the railroad, making about $500 a month. And them times, me making 20 cents an hour to marry his daughter. I know that would never work. And her mother was she's a nice lady. And she was kind of one of these high societies, and prissy-like, and so she didn't have much use for me anyhow. I was just an old plain sassafras country boy, and she thought Hope ought to go with a little better class of boy, and I think she was right. And so, but I didn't think it then. So I thought, well, I don't know, I can't ask her daddy, and I'm sure I'm not going to ask her mother, and so I've got to ask her first. So I wrote me a letter that morning on the road to work. I dropped it in the mailbox. We was going to church Wednesday night, and that was on Monday morning. I tried all day Sunday to tell her that I wanted to get married, and I just couldn't get up enough nerve. So then I dropped it in the mailbox, and at work that day I happened to think, what if her mother got a hold of that letter? Oh, my, then I knowed I was ruined if she ever got a hold of it. Because she didn't care too much about me. Well, I was just sweating it out. And that Wednesday night when I come, oh my, I thought, how am I going to go up there? If her mother got a hold of that letter, she'll really work me over. So I hope she got it. I addressed it to Hope. That was her name, Hope. And so I said, I'll just write it out here to Hope. And I thought maybe she might have not got a hold of it. So I don't better to stop outside and blow the horn for her to come out. Oh, my. And any boy that hasn't got nerve enough to walk up to the house and knock on the door and ask for the girl ain't got no business being out with her anyhow. That's exactly right. That's so silly. That's cheap. And so I stopped my old Ford, and I had it all shined up. And so I went up and knocked at the door. Mercy, your mother come to the door. I couldn't hardly catch her, but I said, how do you do, Miss Brumback? She said, how do you do, William? Oh, William. And she said, will you step in? I said, thank you. I stepped inside the door. I said, is Hope just about ready? And just then here come Hope skipping through the house, just a girl. That's 16. And she said, hi, Billy. And I said, hi, Hope. I said, you about ready for church? She said, just in a minute. I thought, oh, my, she never got it. She never got it. Good, good, good. Hope never got it either, so it'll be all right, because she'd have named it to me. So I felt pretty fair. And then when I got out of church, I happened to think, what if she did get it? See? Now, I couldn't hear what Dr. Davis was saying. I looked over at her and I thought, if maybe she's just holding it back and she's really going to tell me off when I get out of here for asking her that. And I couldn't hear what Brother Davis was saying. And I looked over at her and I thought, I hate to give her up. But the showdown's sure to come. So after church, we started walking down the street together, going home. And so we walked to the old Ford. And so all along the moon is shining bright. So when I look over and she's pretty, boy, I look at her and I thought, how I would like to have her, but guess I can't. And so I walked on a little farther, and I look up at her again. I said, how you feeling tonight? She said, oh, I'm all right. And we stopped the old Ford down, and we started to get out, around the side, walk around the corner, go to her house, and I was walking up to the door with her. I thought, she probably never got the letter, so I just might as well forget it. I'll have another week of grace anyhow. So I got feeling pretty good. She said, Billy? I said, yeah. She said, I got your letter. Oh, my. I said, you did? She said, uh-huh. Well, she just kept walking on, never said another word. I thought, woman, tell me something. Run me away or tell me what you think about it. And I said, did you read it? She said, uh-huh. My. You know how a woman can keep you in suspense? Oh, I didn't mean it that way, you see. But anyhow, I thought, why don't you say something? See, I kept going on. I said, did you read it all? Uh-huh. So he's almost to the door. And I thought, boy, don't get me on the porch, because I might not be able to outrun him. So you tell me now. And so I kept waiting. And she said, Billy, I would love to do that. She said, I love you. God bless her soul now. She's in glory. She said, I love you. Said, I think we ought to tell the parents about it. Don't you think so? And I said, honey, listen, let's start this out with a 50-50 proposition. I said, I'll tell your daddy if you'll tell your mother. Rooting the worst part off on her to begin with. She said, all right, if you'll tell Daddy first. I said, all right, I'll tell him Sunday night. And so Sunday night come, I brought her home from church, and she kept looking at me, and I looked, it's 9:30, it's time for me to get going. So Charlie was sitting at his desk typing away, and Miss Brumback sitting over the corner doing some kind of a crocheting, or them little hooks you put over things, I don't know what you call it. And so she was doing some of that kind of stuff, and Hope kept looking at me. She'd frown at me, motion to her daddy. And oh, my, I thought, what if he says no? So I started out to the door. I said, well, I guess I better go. And I walked to the door, and she started over at the door with me. She'd always come to the door and tell me good night. So I started at the door, and she said, aren't you going to tell him? And I said, I'm sure trying to, but I don't know why I'm going to go to do it. And she said, I'll just go back and you call him out. So she walked back and left me standing there. And I said, Charlie? He turned around and said, yeah, Bill. I said, could I talk to you just a minute? He said, sure. He turned around from his desk. Miss Brumback looked at him, looked toward Hope, looked at me. I said, would you come out on the porch? He said, yes, I'll come out. So he walked out on the porch. I said, sure is a pretty night, isn't it? He said, yes, it is. I said, sure been warm. Certainly has. He looked at me. And I said, I've been working so hard. I said, you know, even my hands is getting callous. He said, you can have her, Bill. Oh, my. You can have her. I thought, oh, that's better. I said, you really mean it, Charlie? I said, Charlie, look, I know she's your daughter and you got money. And he reached over and got me by the hand. He said, Bill, listen, money ain't all things that's in human life. He said, I said, Charlie, I only make 20 cents an hour, but I love her. She loves me. I promise you, Charlie, that I'll work till the calluses wear off of my hands to make her a living. I'll be just as true to her as I could be. He said, I believe that, Bill. He said, listen, Bill, I want to tell you. He said, you know, happiness don't altogether take money to be happy. He said, just be good to her, and I know you will. I said, thank you, Charlie. I sure will do that. And it's her time to tell Mama. I don't know how she got by, but we got married. So when we got married, we didn't have nothing go housekeeping. I think it had $2 or $3. So we rented a house. It cost us $4 a month. It was a little old 2-room place. And someone gave us an old folding bed. I wonder if anybody ever seen an old folding bed. And they gave us that, and I went out to Sears and Roebuck's and got a little table with 4 chairs, and it wasn't painted, you know. And we got that on time. And so then I went over to Mr. Weber, a junk dealer, and bought a cooking stove. I paid 75 cents for it and $1 and something for grates to go in it. We set up housekeeping. I remember taking and painting a shamrock on the chairs when I painted them. And, oh, we were happy. Oh, we had one another, so that's all necessary. God, by His mercy and His goodness, was the happiest little couple could be on the earth. I found this, that happiness does not consist of how much of the world's goods you own, but how contented you are with the portion that's allotted to you. And after a while, God came down and blessed our little home. We had a little boy. His name was Billy Paul. It's in the service right now here. And a little later from that, about 11 months, He blessed us again with a little girl called Sharon Rose, taken from the word of the Rose of Sharon. And I remember one day I had saved up my money, and I was going to take a little vacation, going up to a place, Papaw Lake, to fish. And on my road back, and during this time, I'm leaving out my conversion. I was converted and was ordained by Dr. Roy Davis in the Missionary Baptist Church, and had become a minister and have the tabernacle that I now preach in Jeffersonville. And I was pastoring the little church, and no money. I pastored the church 17 years and never got 1 penny. I didn't believe in there wasn't even an offering plate in it. And what tithings I had from work and so forth, had a little box on the back of the building, said, little sign on it, in so much as you have done unto the least of these my little ones, you have did it unto me. And then that's how the church was paid for. We had 10 years loan to pay it, and was paid off less than 2 years. And I never took an offering of no kind. And then I had a few dollars I saved up for my vacation. She worked too at Fine Shirt Factory, a lovely, darling girl. And her grave is probably snowy today, but she's still in my heart. And I remember when She worked so hard to help me to have enough money to go up to this lake to fish. And when I was coming back from the lake, I began to see coming into Mishawaka and South Bend, Indiana. And I began to notice cars that had signs on the back that said, Jesus only. And I thought, that sounds strange, Jesus only. And I began noticing those signs, and it was on anywhere from bicycles, Fords, Cadillacs, and what more. Jesus only. And I followed some of them down, and I come to a great big church, and I found out they were Pentecostal. I'd heard of Pentecostal, but they were a bunch of holy rollers. They laid on the floor and frothed at their mouth and everything that they told me about. So I didn't want nothing to do with it. So I heard them all carrying on in there, and I thought, believe I'll just walk in. So I stopped my old Ford and walked in, and all the singing you ever heard in your life. And I come to find out there were two great churches, one of them called the PA of JC and the PA of W. Many of you people might remember those old I think they're United called now, called the United Pentecostal Church. Well, I listened to some of their teachers. They were standing there, they were teaching about Jesus and how great He was and how great everything was, and about a baptism of the Holy Ghost. I thought, what are they talking about? And after a while, somebody jumped up and started speaking with tongues. Well, I never heard anything like that in my life. And here comes some woman up through there running just as hard as she could. Then all of them got up and started running. And I thought, well, brother, they sure ain't got no church manners. Screaming and shouting and carrying on. I thought, what a bunch this is. But you know, something about it, longer I sit there, the better I liked it. There was something seemed to be real good. And I began to watch them, and it went on. I thought, I'll just bear with them a while, because I'm close to the door. If anything starts just rational, I'll run out the door. I know where my car's parked, just around the corner. And I begin to hear some of them preachers as scholars and students. Well, I thought, that's fine. So it comes supper time, and said, everybody come to supper. But I thought, wait a minute. I got $1.75 to go home. And that's all I had for gasoline money, just taking that to take me home. And I had my old Ford. It was a pretty good old Ford. It wasn't backslid. It's just like this one out here, it just wore out. And I actually believe that Ford would go 30 miles an hour. But of course that was 15 this way and 15 this way, you see. Put it together, you had 30. And so I thought, well, that night I think I would go out. And after I stayed for the night service, and he said, all of the preachers, regardless of denomination, come to the platform. Well, there's about 200 of us up there. I went up, and so he said, now we haven't got time for you all to preach. He said, just walk by and say who you are and where you're from. Well, it come my time. I said, William Branham, Baptist, Jeffersonville, Indiana. Walk by. I hear all the rest of them calling themselves Pentecostal, 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 PFW, PHAC, PAW. I walked by, I thought, well, I guess I'm the ugly duckling. So I sit down, waited. And that day they had fine young preachers out there, and they'd preached powerfully. And then they said the ones going to bring the message tonight is, I believe they called them elder. And the ministers, instead of reverend, it was elder. And they brought an old colored man out there. And he had one of these old-fashioned preacher's coats. I don't guess you ever seen one. Long pigeon tail in the back, you know, with a velvet collar, and he had just a little white rim of hair around his head. Poor old fellow, he come out like this, you know, and he stood there and he turned around. And where all the preachers had been preaching about Jesus and how great He was and so forth, that old man texted him over in Job. Where was you when I laid the foundation of the world? Or when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy. That poor old fellow, I thought, why did they put some of them young fellows up there to preach? Great, the place is packed and jammed. And I thought, why didn't they do that? So then this old fella, instead of preaching what was going on down here on earth, he began to preach what was going on in heaven all the time. Well, he took him up at the beginning of time and brought him back in the second coming down the horizontal rainbow. I never heard such preaching in my life. About that time the Spirit hit him. He jumped about that high and clicked his heels together, throwed his shoulders back, went tipping off that platform, said, you haven't got room enough up here for me to preach. And he had more room than I got here. I thought, if that'll make an old man act like that, what would he do if he got on me? Maybe I need some of that. Well, he come out there, I felt so sorry for the old fellow, but when he left, I was feeling sorry for myself. And I looked at him go off there. I went out that night and I thought, now the next morning I'm not going to let nobody know who I am. So I went. That night I pressed my trousers. I went out in the cornfield to sleep, and I went out and bought me some stale rolls. I bought a whole bunch of them for a nickel. There's a hydrant down there. I got some water, so I know that would last me a little while. So I got me some water and drank it and went to eat my rolls and come back, got another drink of water and went out in the cornfield, took the 2 seats and laid my little seersucker trousers in there, pressed them on the seat. And that night I prayed pretty near all night. I said, Lord, what is this I got into? I never seen such religious people in my life. And I said, help me to know what this is all about. And the next morning, I got down there and invited us for breakfast. Of course, I wouldn't come eat with them because I had nothing to put in the offering. And I just went back. And the next morning, when I went in, I eat some of my rolls and sat down. And there's got on a microphone, and I'd never seen a microphone before. And I was scared of that thing. So they had a little string hanging up here and hanging down one of them drop mics like. And he said, last night on the platform, there was a young preacher here, a Baptist. I thought, uh-oh, I'm good for working over now. And it said, he was the youngest preacher on the platform. His name was Branham. Does anybody know any whereabouts of him? Tell him to come on. We want him to bring the morning message. Oh, my. I had a little T-shirt on and seersucker trousers, and we Baptists believe you had to have a suit on to get in the pulpit, so... And I just sat real still. And during the time, they had it up in the north then, because their international convention, the colored people couldn't come to it in the south. They had the colored there, and I was a southerner. Had starch in my collar yet. You see, I thought I was a little better than somebody else. And it happened to be that morning, sit right down by me was a colored man. So I sat and looked up at him. I thought, well, he's a brother. And he said, anybody know the whereabouts of William Branham? I scooped down the seat. So he said, announced it the second time. Said, anybody on the outside, he pulled his little mic in, know the whereabouts of William Branham, tell him we want him on the platform for the morning message. He's a Baptist preacher from southern Indiana. I just sat real still and ducked down. Nobody knew me anyhow. That colored boy looked over at me and said, you know where he is? I either had to lie or do something. So I said, hold down here. He said, yes, sir. I said, I want to tell you something. I said, I'm him. He said, well, go on up there. And I said, I can't. See, I said, I got on these little seersucker trousers, this little T-shirt. I said, I couldn't go up there. He said, them people don't care how you dress. Go on up there. I said, no. I said, keep still, don't say nothing now. And he come back to the phone a minute and said, anybody know the whereabouts of William Branham? He said, here he is. Here he is. Here he is. Oh, my. There I got up with that little T-shirt on, and here he said, come on up, Mr. Branham, we want you to bring the message. Oh, my. For all them preachers. All them people. And I went slipping up, my face red, my ears burning. And I slipped up seersucker trousers and T-shirts. Preacher. Baptist preacher going up to the microphone. Never seen one before, you see. I stood up there. I said, well, I don't know about this. I was fumbling real nervous. you.